Hey, what is up all you do-it-yourselfers? My name is Dylan Taylor. This is Dylan's DIY Workshop, and today I'm going to be showing you how I made this headphone hanger right here out of some wood that we bent using hot water.
So I begin with taking this square 2x2 of walnut and I'm ripping it into thinner strips that are approximately 1/8 of an inch thick. I'm using the fence that's on my bandsaw, which is an absolutely amazing feature. If you have a bandsaw that doesn't have a fence, you can always just clamp a block of wood down to the blade. That works just as well. However, it's much nicer to be able to just slide your fence and tighten it down with a screw really quick. So definitely something worth adding to any bandsaw that doesn't have it. So I cut myself a number of strips just in case one of them didn't work out. You can see one's already bent over there. That was just a test one so that I knew it would work. Here I'm sanding off all of the bandsaw marks, like the resaw marks. That's all you really need to do. I went and sanded it smoother, but you really don't need to do that because after we put it in the water, the grain's gonna get really rough again. So just sand out the resaw marks from the bandsaw or any milling marks. Here I'm running the bathtub with the hottest water that we've got and filling it up just enough that I can submerge the piece of wood completely. And the way that I'm keeping it underwater is just with a heavy piece of steel. It's basically a paperweight.
20 minutes later.
You might want to use something other than a piece of steel. You could see a black mark left by the steel on the wood. If that's not preferred, then you definitely want to use something else. You see me bending the wood by hand here first so that it has a gradual curve rather than just wrapping it right around the screws. Now, ideally I would have had a mold made, but the screws do work. It's just hard to get the exact same shape twice. Now I'm just using a heat gun to get rid of all the water and moisture within the wood. You can actually see it going away here. This worked surprisingly well, and it worked a lot better than just letting it dry by air. Also, you saw that the screen went black there. I tripped a breaker by using the heat gun as well as all the other things in my room. So be aware of that. This heat gun should really be run on its own circuit because it's a 14 amp heat gun, so it really can't run with many other things on a 15 amp circuit. So I plugged it into a different circuit and got back to work. Now I'm heating both sides of the wood, making sure not to stay in any one spot too long because this heat gun will burn wood, and it doesn't look too pretty either. Here I'm just trying to match up the curve with the other piece that I had already done. And in a perfect world they would be identical. However, in this specific headphone hanger they aren't exactly the same. If I were to do this again, I would definitely make a mold so that they were the exact same. So once I had the two pieces exactly the same, or as close to the same as I could get them, that's when I sanded them down. They were rough from being in the water. It only took the 220 grit sandpaper and they were fine. Then I used the spilled glue on my table with a foam brush to put glue up between the two pieces, and then found some scrap walnut and clamped it together with a spring clamp just to hold it long enough for me to put my favorite type of clamp on the pieces of wood, and that would be C-clamps. And that's just because of the clamp force that you can get from them. You can really crank them down and they're not going to break like a quick clamp. I've broken countless quick clamps by squeezing them too hard. And here we go with the largest C-clamp I have, and that's just to clamp down at the bottom to hold the two pieces together as best as I can right at the bottom. And then I just let that dry. Once it was dry, there was some glue squeeze out, and you could get rid of this with a glue scraper or with a hand plane, but for me, to make the pieces so that they were smooth together, because one of them was up just a little bit, I decided to use a chisel, and the chisel that I made a video on how to make a handle for. I can put a link to that up in the top right corner of the screen, and basically just use that to get just the last little bit off. Once they were both the same height, I took the 220 grit sandpaper, made it smooth, got rid of the edges, and did the same for the edges of the curved pieces. taking my time to get it really nice. And the pieces were cut a bit wonky with the bandsaw in the first place. That's why it was a bit thin there in the last shot. So I was just trying to cut that down a bit lower to make it wider. And cutting off the excess of that piece to make it shorter. Now I've got another piece of walnut, and that's what we're going to be using to mount to the desk. So just finding the center of the piece that I'm about to cut out, and before I cut it out, I'm going to cut the groove that that piece is going to fit into. Now, the proper way to do this would have been with a router or a table saw. However, I didn't have access to those, and also I couldn't use the bandsaw because it was late at night, so my first tool choice was a chisel. And I did end up cutting myself in the left index finger doing this, so be really careful. In the next shot or two, you'll see me wrapped up with a bandage. Using a V-gouge now, trying to figure out how to do this, when all along I could have just been using a file, which is what I use now. It's the perfect width for the piece of wood that I was actually going to insert into the slot. So there we are with the bandage and the file. So once I got that cut out, I went back to this piece, and I had to make it a little bit thinner because it was on a bit of a taper, so I had to make it flat actually. So I took my chisel, got rid of the bulk of the material, then used the file to make it nice and smooth and also have a nice transition. If I did this again, I would start off with perfectly square stock, and here I'm just using some weld bond glue because my Titebond 3 container is just screwed up. And almost forgot, but I needed to drill these holes and countersink where the screw head would go before we put it together, because once we put it together there would have been no room for the screw gun. And there we go, attaching the two pieces, and boom, quick clamp.
So it's clamped in the vise, and then this is clamped down using the table because I can't clamp any force here. It'll split the two of those apart. So the only way is to hold on to this and then clamp something to it like I've done here with my 36-inch bar clamp.
So moving on now, once the glue was dry, I went ahead and got some shellac. I had to move the Casey Neistat wood burning because I really didn't want to mess it up by getting a little bit of shellac on it. If you haven't seen that video, I really encourage you guys to check it out. It's the biggest and longest wood burning that I've ever done. It took around 60 hours, and I made a crate for it as well. I didn't make a video for the crate because when I did it, I just really didn't have time. And here we go, using a little foam brush that I keep in a jar now to put the shellac on the piece. Just a thin coat everywhere, and then putting the brush back in the jar. This way I can reuse the brush because it doesn't dry out. I did have to cut the handle off the brush though. I learned that tip watching a YouTube video. I forget whose it was though, but thank you to whoever it was. And I always flip the container upside down, make sure it doesn't leak, so that I know that it's closed.
And now that it's dry, it's all nice and shiny. And this is actually the second coat, mainly because I didn't have time to turn the camera on last time. But I'm going to do the same thing here as I did last time. And that is just take some 220 or 320 grit sandpaper and just get rid of the extra shine until it's all smooth to the touch. And you can do as many of these coats as you'd like. I think I'm going to stop at 2 for this specific project. Once you've sanded it down, you can also take a Scotch-Brite pad right here and make it shiny again. You also want to make sure you wipe off the dust that comes off of this before you put another layer of shellac on. You can do that with the paper towel.
And here comes actually mounting it on the desk. I used some 1/2-inch screws to do this, and they have the green Robertson head. The shortest stubby screwdriver I had was too long for this, and I had to go back and find something else. So what I did is I used my I-ratchet screwdriver with a green Robertson driver bit and got my brother to help hold this up while I put the screw in, because it took 2 hands to hold the screwdriver and another hand to hold it up to the desk. You could have done this with a clamp, but thankfully I had my brother to help, so that's what we did. Once I got the screw in far enough, I switched on the ratchet mechanism, and that allowed me to get the screw in just a little bit faster, and this was an amazing tool for this job. I don't know if I would have been able to do it otherwise unless I had some kind of 90-degree drive shaft, and I don't have one of those, so this worked perfectly. The second screw went in much easier because the hanger was already on the desk at that point, and I had to go in on a bit of an angle just because of the shape of the hook, but once it was on there, it held just perfectly.
Alright, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys learned something new. I definitely did. I had a lot of fun making this and learned some new things about bending wood. I want to give a huge thank you to all of my Patreon supporters. You guys are what is allowing me to keep creating videos the way that I do. And a huge thank you to the top tier Patreon supporters, Randy, Robinbert, and Mike Maxwell. You guys are extra special. If you guys want to help support me on Patreon, there will be a card up in the top right corner of the screen, as well as in the description as always. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If you guys are new, please subscribe. If you already subscribed, please share this video with a friend. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, give it a big old thumbs up. See you guys all next time. Peace out.